Aldrics Unseen Scars. Washington, D.C., 1920. Clarissa Moore observed a shifting shadow on the walls of an old government building that intermittently formed the outline of Lieutenant Raymond Pierce, a spectral reminder of days gone by. Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Wall. The late afternoon sun, a pale imitation of its summer self, slanted through the grimy windows of the War Department building, casting long, distorted shadows across Clarissa Moore's desk. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, a silent, swirling ballet against the backdrop of endless paperwork. 2 years. 2 years since the armistice, and yet the building still felt saturated with the war, a lingering ghost in every corridor, every hushed conversation. Clarissa traced the outline of a requisition form with a slender finger, the paper brittle and yellowed, much like her own spirit felt these days. She was 38, a widow though that word still felt foreign, a cruel brand on her heart, and a clerk in the vast, labyrinthine bureaucracy that had once churned out orders for men and munitions, and now churned out what? Pensions mostly. And denials. A never-ending stream of pleas from broken men and grieving families, each one a tiny hammer blow to her own carefully constructed composure. Clarissa sighed, pushing a stray strand of chestnut hair, threaded with premature silver, back from her forehead. Her eyes, once a vibrant hazel, now held a perpetual shadow, a reflection of the endless grayness that seemed to have settled over her life. She glanced up at the wall opposite her desk, a blank expanse of faded cream paint, punctuated only by a water stain near the ceiling. And the shadow. It was there again. Faint but unmistakable. A trick of the light, of course. A peculiar interplay of the setting sun and the warped glass of the window. And yet it always appeared at this hour, just as the day began to surrender to the encroaching dusk. A vaguely human-shaped darkness, elongated and distorted, but with a distinct familiarity. It was the way the shadow held itself, a certain tilt to the head, the broadness of the shoulders. The way it seemed to lean, as if burdened by some unseen weight. A weight Clarissa knew all too well. She dismissed it at first. Grief did strange things to the mind, everyone said. Made you see things, hear things, imagine things that weren't there. But the shadow persisted, appearing day after day, a silent, spectral visitor in the fading light. And each time, Clarissa felt a familiar ache in her chest, a tightening that stole her breath and left her trembling. Today, the shadow seemed more defined, more present. Clarissa stared, transfixed, as the shifting darkness coalesced, sharpened, momentarily forming a near-perfect outline. The outline of a man in uniform, a soldier, Lieutenant Raymond Pierce. The name whispered through her mind, unbidden, unwelcome, yet achingly familiar. Raymond. Her Raymond. Lost in the Argonne. Swallowed by the mud and the blood and the relentless shelling. A telegram had delivered the news, stark and brutal, stripping away her world in a single, devastating sentence. Regret to inform you she'd crumpled the telegram in her fist, the sharp edges of the paper cutting into her palm, a physical pain that was a welcome distraction from the agonizing hollowness that had opened up inside her. She hadn't even been able to properly bury him. Not that there had been a body. She'd received a small box containing his few, muddy possessions, a tarnished silver locket she had gifted him and 2 letters, and that was all that remained of the man with a warm smile. Clarissa blinked, shaking her head. The shadow was fading now, dissolving back into the amorphous darkness as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Just a trick of the light. It had to be. And yet she reached into the top drawer of her desk, her fingers fumbling for the small, worn velvet box she kept hidden there. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded cotton, lay a photograph. A young man in uniform, his eyes bright with laughter, his arms slung around a younger, radiant Clarissa. Lieutenant Raymond Pierce. Her husband. Her love. The photograph was taken just before he shipped out. They'd had such hopes, such dreams. A small cottage in Georgetown, children, a life filled with quiet joys and shared laughter. All gone, reduced to ashes and shadows. Clarissa closed the box, her fingers lingering on the smooth velvet. She was a practical woman, a woman of reason. She didn't believe in ghosts. And yet the shadow on the wall, the persistent ache in her heart, the way her hand still trembled when she thought of him, a soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly tucked the box back into the drawer, smoothing her skirt and forcing a semblance of composure onto her face. "Come in," she called, her voice sounding surprisingly steady. The door opened, and Mr. Henderson, her supervisor, a portly man with a perpetually worried expression, peered in. "Mrs. Moore," he said, his voice hushed, as if afraid of disturbing the ghosts that haunted the building. "There's a gentleman here to see you." Clarissa frowned. A gentleman? At this hour? It was almost closing time. Mr. Henderson hesitated. He insisted. Said it was a matter of some urgency. He mentioned Lieutenant Pierce. The blood drained from Clarissa's face. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine, a chilling premonition that sent shivers through her body. "Lieutenant Pierce?" She repeated, the name a fragile whisper. Mr. Henderson nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. "He's waiting in the reception area." Clarissa stood, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She smoothed her skirt again, a futile attempt to quell the tremors that were now racking her body. Who could this man be? And what could he possibly want to tell her about Raymond? After all this time? She walked towards the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and a flicker of something else. Something she hadn't dared to feel in years. A fragile, almost imperceptible spark of hope. But hope for what? She could not have said. Hope that the shadow held a truth she wasn't ready for. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Argonne. The reception area was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single, bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and old paper, a familiar aroma that usually comforted Clarissa, but tonight it felt oppressive, suffocating. A lone figure stood silhouetted against the large, arched window that overlooked the darkening cityscape, his back to the room. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his worn, tweed coat. Clarissa hesitated, her hand still on the doorknob. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic beating of her heart. "Sir?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. The figure turned, and Clarissa gasped. He was not Raymond. Of course he wasn't. Raymond was gone. Lost. But there was something uncannily familiar about this man. The way he held himself, the set of his jaw, the intense gaze of his dark eyes. He stepped forward, into the pool of light, and Clarissa saw that he was older than she'd first thought, his face etched with lines of hardship and something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Sorrow. Deep, profound sorrow. "Mrs. Moore?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, roughened by what sounded like years of disuse. Clarissa nodded, unable to speak. She felt a strange dizziness, a sense of unreality, as if she were caught in a dream. He extended a hand, his palm calloused and scarred. "My name is Captain Thomas Ashton. I served with your husband in the Argonne." The Argonne. The name was a knife twisting in her gut. She remembered the endless newspaper reports, the casualty lists, the whispered horror stories of that brutal, bloody battle. The battle that had claimed Raymond. She took his hand, her own trembling. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm. "Captain Ashton," she managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. What brings you here?" He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "I have something to tell you. Something about Raymond. About how he died." Clarissa felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. She'd been told the official story, of course. A shell. A direct hit. Instantaneous. Merciful, they'd said. But she'd always harbored a secret doubt, a nagging suspicion that there was more to the story. A truth too terrible to be revealed. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "Tell me." Captain Ashton led her to a pair of worn, leather chairs tucked into a corner of the room. They sat in silence for a moment, The only sound the distant rumble of traffic and the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. He began to speak, his voice low and measured, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. He spoke of the mud, the relentless rain, the constant shelling, the fear that gnawed at the men's souls. He spoke of Raymond's courage, his unwavering loyalty to his men, his quiet determination to do his duty, even in the face of unimaginable horror. Clarissa listened, her heart aching with a mixture of grief and pride. She'd always known Raymond was brave, but to hear it confirmed, to hear the details of his heroism, it was both a balm and a fresh wound. Then, Captain Ashton's voice changed. It became hesitant, strained. The official report, it wasn't entirely accurate, he said, his gaze finally meeting hers. There was more to it. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. What? What happened? He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. Raymond, he didn't die instantly. He was wounded.
Badly.
I was with him. Tears welled up in Clarissa's eyes, blurring her vision. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, pictured Raymond lying wounded, alone in the mud. But to hear it from someone who'd been there, it was almost unbearable. We all tried to get him to safety, Captain Ashton continued, his voice thick with emotion. But the shelling, it was relentless. We were pinned down. He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands. He clenched and unclenched them, as if struggling to find the right words.
He knew he was dying. He gave me something.
Something to give to you. Captain Ashton reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, mud-stained leather pouch. He held it out to Clarissa, his hand trembling. Clarissa stared at the pouch, her heart pounding. It was Raymond's. She recognized the worn leather, the faint scent of his tobacco that still clung to it. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his, and took the pouch. It felt heavy in her hand, weighted down with unspoken secrets and the last remnants of her husband's life. He wanted you to have this, Captain Ashton said, his voice choked with emotion. He said it would explain everything. Explain everything? What did that mean? What secrets could this pouch possibly hold? Clarissa looked at Captain Ashton, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The hope that some small good would remain after so much loss. She looked back at the pouch and tightened her grasp. She had to know. Chapter 3. The Telegram and the Tear. Clarissa's fingers fumbled with the drawstrings of the pouch, her hands still shaking from the encounter with Captain Ashton. The leather was stiff and cracked with age, the mud of the argonne seemingly embedded in its very fibers. The scent of Raymond's tobacco, faint but unmistakable, rose to her nostrils, bringing with it a fresh wave of grief, so intense it felt like a physical blow. She finally managed to loosen the strings and open the pouch. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded cloth, were several items. A small, tarnished silver locket, the one she had given him, the one he had always worn, a few folded pieces of paper, yellowed and brittle with age, and a photograph. Clarissa carefully lifted the photograph, her breath catching in her throat. It was a picture of her, taken before the war, when she was younger, happier. She remembered the day it was taken, a sunny afternoon in Rock Creek Park, Raymond by her side, his arm around her waist, his eyes filled with love. She had almost forgotten that version of herself. On the back of the photograph, in Raymond's familiar handwriting, was a single word, always. A tear slipped down Clarissa's cheek, landing on the photograph, blurring the image. She quickly wiped it away, but the stain remained, a permanent reminder of her loss. Always. He had promised her forever. And then the war had come, stealing everything. She set the photograph aside and reached for the folded papers. The first one was a letter, addressed to her, in Raymond's handwriting. The date was just a few days before he died. Clarissa's heart ached as she unfolded the letter, her fingers tracing the familiar loops and swirls of his script. My dearest Clarissa, the shelling has been relentless these past few days. I don't know how much longer we can hold out. But I wanted to tell you that I love you, more than words can say. You are my light, my anchor, my everything. If I don't make it back, please know that I died thinking of you, of our life together, of the future we had planned. There's something else, something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you before I left. But I was afraid. Afraid of your reaction. Afraid of losing you. But now I have no choice. I wasn't entirely honest with you about my assignment here. It wasn't just fighting. There was something else. Something dangerous. Clarissa's brow furrowed.
What was he talking about?
What assignment? What danger? I was approached by a certain agency. They needed someone who could speak French, someone who could blend in. I was asked to gather intelligence. Behind enemy lines. Clarissa gasped. Raymond?
A spy?
It seemed impossible. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a gentle soul, a kind man. The thought of him risking his life in such a way, it was terrifying. I know this is a shock, my love. But I did it for you. For us. For our future. I wanted to make a difference. To help end this war. But I fear I may have made things worse. There's a man, his name is Dubois. He's a double agent. He's been feeding us false information, leading us into traps. I discovered his treachery. But I fear it's too late. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. It means Dubois, he got to me. But you need to know the truth. You need to warn them. Tell them about Dubois. He's still out there. He's dangerous. I love you, Clarissa. Always. Forever. Raymond. Clarissa stared at the letter, her mind reeling. Raymond, a spy. Dubois, a double agent. It was like something out of a dime novel, a world of shadows and secrets, of betrayal and deception. And yet it was real. It was her reality. She reached back into the pouch and pulled out the remaining papers. They were maps. Military maps, marked with various symbols and notations. And a telegram. The telegram was crumpled and stained, as if it had been clutched tightly in someone's hand. Clarissa carefully unfolded it, her heart pounding. It was addressed to Raymond, from the War Department. Dubois confirmed. Operation Nightingale compromised. Proceed with extreme caution. Await further instructions. Clarissa's blood ran cold. Operation Nightingale. What was that? And Dubois, he was confirmed. It meant Raymond had been right. He had uncovered the truth. But it had cost him his life. A sudden wave of anger washed over Clarissa, a fierce, burning rage that consumed her grief. Raymond had been betrayed. He had been sent on a dangerous mission, based on false information, and he had paid the ultimate price. And Dubois, he was still out there. Still a threat. Clarissa looked at the photograph of herself, at the word always written on the back. She thought of Raymond, of his courage, his sacrifice, his love. She thought of the shadow on the wall, the spectral reminder of his presence. She knew what she had to do. She had to fulfill his last request. She had to warn them. She had to expose Dubois. She had to fight for justice. For Raymond. For herself. And for the future he had so desperately wanted for them both. The telegram, crumpled in her grasp, felt like the first thread of a tangled web she was now compelled to unravel. Chapter 4. A Promise at Twilight. The walk back to her small Georgetown apartment felt longer than usual, each step heavy with the weight of Raymond's revelations. The twilight had deepened into a starless night, the gaslights casting long, flickering shadows that danced around her like the ghosts of her past. The city, usually a comforting hum of activity, felt menacing tonight, every darkened doorway a potential hiding place, every passing stranger a possible enemy. Clarissa clutched the leather pouch containing Raymond's letter and the incriminating telegram, her fingers digging into the worn material. She felt a strange mixture of fear and determination, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before the war. Raymond's death had left her adrift, a ship without a rudder, lost in a sea of grief. But now she had a mission, a reason to fight. She reached her apartment building, a modest brick structure on a quiet, tree-lined street. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, her legs aching, her mind racing. She unlocked the door to her apartment, the familiar click of the lock a small comfort in the growing darkness. The apartment was small, but cozy, filled with the remnants of her life with Raymond. His books lined the shelves, his pipe rested on the mantelpiece, his favorite armchair sat by the window, still bearing the faint imprint of his body. Clarissa had kept everything exactly as he had left it, unable to bear the thought of erasing any trace of him. She lit a lamp, the soft glow illuminating the room, chasing away some of the shadows. She placed the leather pouch on the small table in the center of the room, the incriminating contents a stark reminder of the task ahead. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to expose Du Bois without putting herself in danger. She knew she couldn't go to the War Department directly. Raymond's letter had made it clear that Du Bois had connections there, that he was a dangerous man with powerful allies. She needed to find someone she could trust, someone who could help her navigate the treacherous world of espionage and betrayal. But who? Clarissa paced the room, her mind racing. She thought of her friends, her colleagues, her neighbors. But none of them seemed suitable. They were all good people, but they were not equipped to deal with something like this. This required someone with experience, with knowledge of the inner workings of the government, someone discreet. Suddenly, a name came to mind. Senator Alistair Fairbanks. Senator Fairbanks was a distant relative of Raymond's, a powerful and influential man with a reputation for integrity and a known dislike for corruption. Clarissa had met him only a few times, at family gatherings before the war, but she remembered him as a kind, intelligent man, with a sharp mind and a keen sense of justice. He was also a member of the Senate Committee on Military Affairs. He would have the power, the influence, to investigate Du Bois and bring him to justice. It was a long shot, Clarissa knew. Senator Fairbanks was a busy man, a man of importance. He might not even remember her. But she had no other choice. She had to try. She sat down at her small writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. She dipped her pen in the inkwell and began to write, her hand trembling slightly. Senator Fairbanks, my name is Clarissa Moore. I am the widow of Lieutenant Raymond Pierce, who served with the American Expeditionary Forces in France. I am writing to you today with a matter of utmost urgency concerning my husband's death and a conspiracy that threatens the security of our nation. She paused, her mind racing. She couldn't reveal everything in the letter. It was too dangerous. She needed to meet with him in person, to show him Raymond's letter and the telegram, to explain everything. I know this is an unusual request, but I believe my husband uncovered evidence of a double agent operating within the War Department, a man named Du Bois. This information is sensitive, and I fear for my safety. I believe you are the only person I can trust with this. I would be grateful if you could grant me a meeting at your earliest convenience. I can be reached at the above address. I await your reply with hope and desperation. Sincerely, Clarissa Moore. Clarissa reread the letter, her heart pounding. It was a risk, a desperate gamble. But she had to take it. She folded the letter and sealed it with wax, her hand trembling. She addressed the envelope to Senator Fairbanks, his name and title a stark reminder of the power she was appealing to. She looked out the window, at the darkening sky. The city was slowly falling asleep, its lights flickering like dying embers. Clarissa felt a surge of determination, a renewed sense of purpose. She had made a promise to Raymond, a promise to expose his killer and bring him to justice. And she would not rest until that promise was fulfilled. Even in the deepening twilight, she would find a way. She had to. For Raymond. Chapter 5. The Secrets of Georgetown. The following days were a blur of anxious waiting and meticulous planning. Clarissa went through the motions of her life, attending to her duties at the War Department, exchanging polite greetings with her neighbors, but her mind was elsewhere, consumed by the impending meeting with Senator Fairbanks. She studied Raymond's maps, trying to decipher the cryptic notations, searching for any clue that might shed light on Operation Nightingale and Du Bois's treachery. She kept the leather pouch hidden under her mattress, taking it out only when she was alone, rereading Raymond's letter and the telegram, her heart aching with each word. She felt his presence in the apartment, a comforting warmth in the empty spaces, a silent reassurance that she was not alone in this fight. She also began to explore her own neighborhood, the quiet, cobbled streets of Georgetown, with a new awareness. She noticed the discreet comings and goings of government officials, the unmarked cars parked outside certain houses, the hushed conversations in the local cafes. She realized that Georgetown, with its stately homes and seemingly placid atmosphere, was a hotbed of secrets, a place where power and intrigue intertwined. One afternoon, while walking home from work, she noticed a man watching her. He was standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. He was tall and thin, dressed in a nondescript suit, but there was something about him, something that made her uneasy. Clarissa quickened her pace, her heart pounding. She glanced back, but the man was gone. She dismissed it as paranoia, a product of her heightened anxiety, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a response arrived from Senator Fairbanks. It was a short, formal note, acknowledging her letter and requesting a meeting at his Georgetown residence the following evening. Clarissa's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The meeting was set. She had a chance. But she also knew that she was stepping into a dangerous game, a world of shadows and lies, where one wrong move could have dire consequences. That evening, she carefully prepared for the meeting. She chose a simple, dark blue dress, one that conveyed both respect and seriousness. She brushed her hair, pinning it up in a neat bun, and applied a touch of rouge to her pale cheeks. She wanted to look composed, confident, even though she felt anything but. She took the leather pouch from its hiding place and examined its contents one last time. Raymond's letter, the telegram, the maps, the photograph, they were her weapons, her evidence, her only hope of convincing Senator Fairbanks of the truth. She slipped the photograph into her handbag, a tangible reminder of Raymond's love, a source of strength in the face of the unknown. She then carefully placed the other items back in the pouch and tucked it inside her coat, close to her heart. As she walked to Senator Fairbanks's residence, the streets of Georgetown seemed to take on a different character. The familiar houses, with their glowing windows and manicured gardens, now seemed to conceal hidden secrets, their inhabitants potentially involved in the web of intrigue she was about to unravel. The Fairbanks residence was a grand, imposing structure set back from the street behind a wrought iron fence. A uniformed guard stood at the gate, his eyes scrutinizing her as she approached. Clarissa stated her name and the purpose of her visit, her voice surprisingly steady. The guard checked a list, then nodded and opened the gate, allowing her to pass. She walked up the long, winding driveway, her heart pounding in her chest. The house loomed before her, its windows glowing warmly, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. But Clarissa knew that within those walls, danger lurked. She was walking into the lion's den, and she had no idea what awaited her. The secrets of Georgetown were about to be laid bare, and she was at the center of it all. The grand house felt less like a welcoming home and more like a carefully constructed trap. Chapter 6. Whispers in the War Office. Senator Fairbanks greeted Clarissa in a spacious, book-lined study, the air thick with the scent of leather and old paper. He was a tall, imposing man, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He gestured for her to sit in a comfortable armchair opposite his large, mahogany desk. "Mrs. Moore," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Thank you for coming. Your letter was intriguing, to say the least." Clarissa took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Senator Fairbanks," she began, "I know this is a delicate matter, but I believe it is of utmost importance. It concerns my husband, Lieutenant Raymond Pierce, and his death in the Argonne." She reached into her coat and pulled out the leather pouch. She placed it on the desk. Between them, the worn leather a stark contrast to the polished wood. Senator Fairbanks raised an eyebrow, his gaze fixed on the pouch. "Lieutenant Pierce, yes, I remember him. A brave young man. A tragic loss. His death was not accidental, Senator," Clarissa said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was murdered." The senator's expression changed, his eyes narrowing. "Murdered?" "Mrs. Moore," That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Clarissa opened the pouch and carefully extracted Raymond's letter. She handed it to the senator, her hand shaking. This is a letter he wrote to me, just days before he died. He explains everything. Senator Fairbanks took the letter and began to read, his brow furrowing with each passing line. Clarissa watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the shock, the disbelief, the growing anger in his eyes as he absorbed Raymond's words. When he finished reading, he looked up at Clarissa, his expression grave. This is extraordinary, Mrs. Moore. Absolutely extraordinary. A double agent? Within the War Department? It's unthinkable. But it's true, Senator, Clarissa insisted.
He also sent me this.
She handed him the telegram, the crumpled paper a testament to Raymond's desperate attempt to warn his superiors. Senator Fairbanks examined the telegram, his lips tightening. Operation Nightingale, I've heard whispers of it. A highly classified intelligence operation. But I had no idea. He paused, his gaze sweeping over Clarissa. And this Du Bois, you believe he's still out there? Clarissa nodded. Raymond was certain of it. He said Du Bois was dangerous. That he had connections. Senator Fairbanks leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. He was silent for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. Clarissa waited, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Finally he spoke. Mrs. Moore, I believe you. I believe your husband. And I believe we have a serious problem on our hands. Relief washed over Clarissa, so intense it almost brought her to her knees. He believed her. He was going to help. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Senator Fairbanks stood up and began to pace the room, his hands clasped behind his back. We need to proceed cautiously. Very cautiously. Du Bois, if he is who your husband says he is a dangerous man. He has powerful allies, possibly within the War Department itself. He stopped pacing and looked at Clarissa, his eyes filled with a steely determination. I will initiate a discreet investigation. I will use my contacts within the intelligence community to gather information, to track down Du Bois and uncover his network.
He paused.
But I will need your help, Mrs. Moore. You are the key to this. You have the evidence, the knowledge, the connection to Raymond. You are the only one who can verify his claims. Clarissa nodded, her heart pounding. She was afraid, yes, but she was also determined. She would not let Raymond's sacrifice be in vain. I will do whatever it takes, Senator, she said, her voice firm. Senator Fairbanks smiled, a grim smile that held a hint of admiration. Good. Then we have a partnership. A dangerous partnership, but a necessary one. He walked over to a small cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured them each a drink, the amber liquid glinting in the lamplight. To Raymond Pierce, he said, raising his glass. And to justice. Clarissa raised her glass, her hand trembling slightly. To Raymond, she echoed. They drank in silence, the whiskey burning a path down her throat. Clarissa felt a strange sense of camaraderie with the senator, a shared purpose that transcended their different backgrounds and social positions. They were in this together now, bound by a common goal, a shared determination to expose the truth and bring Du Bois to justice. The whispers in the War Office were about to become a roar, and she and the senator were at the center of the storm. The partnership, forged in a dimly lit study, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Chapter 7. The Unsent Letter. The following weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, coded messages, and whispered conversations. Clarissa found herself drawn into a world of espionage and intrigue, a world she had only glimpsed in Raymond's letter. Senator Fairbanks, true to his word, initiated a discreet investigation, using his considerable influence and network of contacts to gather information on Du Bois and Operation Nightingale. Clarissa, meanwhile, continued her work at the War Department, her days now a carefully constructed facade of normalcy, masking the dangerous game she was playing. She paid close attention to the office gossip, the whispered conversations, the subtle shifts in power dynamics. She was searching for any clue, any indication that might lead her to Du Bois or his allies. One evening, while sorting through a pile of old files, she stumbled upon a document that made her blood run cold. It was a personnel file, marked confidential, belonging to a man named Jean-Luc Dubois. Clarissa's heart pounded as she opened the file, her fingers trembling. The file contained a photograph of Dubois, a man with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He looked familiar.
Disturbingly familiar.
She scanned the file, her eyes racing over the details of his career. He had been recruited by the War Department several years earlier, ostensibly as a translator due to his fluency in French and German. He had quickly risen through the ranks, gaining access to increasingly sensitive information. But there was something else. Something that made Clarissa's breath catch in her throat. A note, scrawled in the margin of one of the pages, in a handwriting she recognized instantly. Raymond's handwriting. Dubois suspect. Check connections to the note ended abruptly, as if Raymond had been interrupted. But the message was clear. Raymond had suspected Dubois long before he wrote his letter to Clarissa. He had been investigating him, gathering evidence. Clarissa felt a surge of anger, a fierce determination to finish what Raymond had started. She carefully copied the note, her hand trembling, and then returned the file to its place, making sure to leave no trace of her discovery. That night, she met with Senator Fairbanks in a secluded corner of Rock Creek Park, the rustling leaves and the distant sounds of the city providing a cover for their clandestine conversation. "I found something," Clarissa said, her voice low and urgent. She handed him the copy of the note she had made from Dubois's file. Senator Fairbanks examined the note, his brow furrowing. "Raymond's handwriting, this confirms his suspicions. It also means Dubois has been operating within the War Department for much longer than we thought." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Clarissa. "We need to be careful, Mrs. Moore. Dubois is clearly a dangerous man, with powerful connections. He won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens him." Clarissa nodded, her heart pounding. She knew the risks. She had seen the fear in Captain Ashton's eyes, the haunted look that spoke of the horrors he had witnessed in the Argonne. But she was not afraid. She was driven by a fierce determination to avenge Raymond's death, to bring Dubois to justice. "I have something else," Clarissa said, reaching into her handbag. She pulled out another piece of paper, a letter, still sealed, that she had found tucked inside the lining of Raymond's leather pouch, hidden beneath the maps and the telegram. She hadn't noticed it before, so carefully had it been concealed. "I found this in Raymond's pouch," she explained. "It's another letter, addressed to me, but it was never sent." Senator Fairbanks took the letter, his eyes widening. He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the paper, his gaze scanning the contents. Clarissa watched him, her heart aching. She could see the emotion in his eyes, the sadness, the regret. When he finished reading, he looked up at Clarissa, his expression grave. This changes everything, Mrs. Moore."
"What?
"What does it say?" Clarissa asked, her voice trembling. Senator Fairbanks hesitated. "It's personal, Mrs. Moore. Very personal. But it reveals a crucial piece of information. Something that could help us expose Dubois." He handed the letter back to Clarissa, his hand trembling slightly. "Read it," he said. "But be prepared. It's not easy." Clarissa took the letter with shaking fingers, and it lay heavy, like lead, on her open palm. The unsent words of her husband, a message from beyond the grave that promised to change everything. And not in a good way. Chapter 8. Dance of the Deceived. Clarissa unfolded the unsent letter, the paper brittle and yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Raymond's handwriting, so familiar, yet now imbued with a haunting poignancy, seemed to leap off the page. "My dearest Clarissa, I write this with a heavy heart, knowing that I may never have the chance to say these words to you in person. There are things I haven't told you, secrets I've kept hidden, for fear of hurting you, of losing you. But now, with the shadow of death looming over me, I can no longer bear the burden of silence. The truth is, my love, I've been living a lie, not just here in the war, but before, for years. My involvement with Operation Nightingale, it goes back much further than I led you to believe. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. What was he saying? What secrets had he kept hidden? Before I met you, Clarissa, I was involved with another woman. Her name was Isabelle Dubois. Yes, the sister of the very man I am now hunting. A cold dread washed over Clarissa. Isabelle. The name echoed in her mind, a discordant note in the symphony of her memories. She was beautiful, captivating, everything I thought I wanted. We were passionate, reckless. But it was a fleeting affair, a youthful indiscretion that I quickly regretted. I broke it off, I changed, moved to Washington. And then I met you, my love, and my life truly began. You were my salvation, my redemption. But Isabelle, she never forgot me. She followed me. She threatened to expose our past, to ruin my reputation, my career. I paid her money. I did everything I could to keep her quiet. But it was never enough. Clarissa felt a sharp pang of betrayal. Not by Raymond, but by the circumstances, by the cruel twist of fate that had entangled him with this woman, this Isabelle. When the war broke out, I hoped that it would be a chance to escape, to start anew. But Isabelle, she found me again. She used her brother's, Jean-Luc's connections within the War Department to secure my assignment to Operation Nightingale. It was a trap, Clarissa. A way to control me, to keep me under her thumb. Clarissa gasped. So Dubois's involvement was not just about espionage. It was personal. A twisted game of revenge, orchestrated by a scorned lover. I discovered the truth too late, my love. I realized that Isabelle and Jean-Luc were working together, feeding us false information, leading us into ambushes. They were playing both sides, betraying our country for their own gain. And I was their pawn. If I expose my relationship with Isabelle, they will reveal things about my past and destroy my honor and, by extension, yours. If I do nothing, more soldiers die. I am trapped, Clarissa. Trapped by my past, by my mistakes. I don't know what to do. I only know that I love you, more than anything in the world. And I'm so sorry. So sorry for the pain I've caused you, for the lies I've told, for the danger I've put you in. Forgive me, my love. Please forgive me. Raymond. Clarissa finished reading the letter, tears streaming down her face. The pain was almost unbearable, a crushing weight of grief and understanding. Raymond had been trapped, manipulated, forced to make impossible choices. He had been a victim just as much as she was. She looked up at Senator Fairbanks, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. He was protecting me, she said, her voice choked with emotion. He was protecting my honor, even at the cost of his own life. Senator Fairbanks nodded, his expression somber. He was a brave man, Mrs. Moore. A flawed man, perhaps, but a brave one nonetheless. He paused. This letter, it changes everything. It gives us a motive, a connection between Dubois and your husband. It also explains why Dubois has been so elusive, so difficult to track down. He's been protected, not just by his allies within the War Department, but by his sister and her hold over your husband. We need to find her, Clarissa said, her voice firm. Isabelle. She's the key to this. She's the one who can expose Dubois, who can reveal the truth about Operation Nightingale. Senator Fairbanks nodded. I agree. But finding her will be difficult. She's clearly a master of deception, a woman who knows how to disappear. He paused, his gaze sweeping over Clarissa. We need to use this letter, Mrs. Moore. But carefully.
Strategically.
We need to expose Isabelle's connection to Raymond, without revealing the sensitive details of their past. We need to protect your reputation, your honor, while still bringing Dubois to justice. Clarissa understood. It was a delicate dance, a dangerous game of deception and revelation. But she was ready to play. She had come this far. She would not back down now. She would expose Isabelle and Dubois, and she would clear Raymond's name, even if it meant risking everything. The dance of the deceived had begun, and she was determined to be the last one standing. Even with a broken heart. Chapter 9. The Photograph and the Phantom. The search for Isabelle Dubois proved to be more challenging than Clarissa and Senator Fairbanks had anticipated. She seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving no forwarding address, no contacts. no indication of her whereabouts. The War Department, under the senator's subtle pressure, launched an internal investigation, but it yielded little fruit. Du Bois, it seemed, had covered his tracks well, and his sister was equally adept at the art of disappearing. Clarissa, however, refused to give up. She spent hours poring over Raymond's papers, searching for any clue, any hint that might lead her to Isabel. She revisited the places they had frequented together, the cafes, the parks, the theaters, hoping to find someone who might remember her, who might have seen her with Raymond. One evening, while going through Raymond's belongings once again, she discovered something she had overlooked before. It was a small, hidden compartment in his old writing desk, a secret drawer that she had never known existed. Inside, she found a single item, a photograph. Clarissa's heart pounded as she lifted the photograph, her fingers trembling. It was a picture of Raymond and Isabel. They were standing together, arm in arm, smiling at the camera. Isabel was even more beautiful than Clarissa had imagined, with dark, alluring eyes and a captivating smile. She was wearing a stylish dress, her hair elegantly coiffed, a picture of sophistication and charm. Raymond looked younger, happier, but there was a certain unease in his eyes, a subtle tension that betrayed his true feelings. Clarissa stared at the photograph, her heart aching with a mixture of emotions. Jealousy, yes, but also pity. Pity for Raymond, trapped in a web of deceit and manipulation, and pity for Isabel, a woman driven by obsession and revenge. On the back of the photograph, in Raymond's handwriting, was a single word: regret. Clarissa felt a surge of anger, a fierce determination to expose Isabel, to make her pay for what she had done to Raymond. She carefully placed the photograph in her handbag, alongside the other evidence she had gathered. It was another piece of the puzzle, another weapon in her arsenal. The next day, Clarissa decided to visit Captain Ashton, the man who had brought her Raymond's final message. She needed to talk to him, to ask him about Isabel, to see if he knew anything that might help her find her. She found Captain Ashton living in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. He was a shadow of the man she had met before, his eyes hollow, his body emaciated, his spirit broken by the horrors he had witnessed in the war. He greeted her with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. He seemed reluctant to talk about Raymond, about the Argonne, about anything related to the war. But Clarissa persisted. She showed him Raymond's letter, the telegram, the photograph of him and Isabel. She explained everything, her voice trembling with emotion. Captain Ashton listened in silence, his gaze fixed on the photograph. He seemed haunted, as if the image had conjured up painful memories. Finally, he spoke. "Isabel," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I remember her. She visited Raymond in the camp. A few times. She was striking, beautiful, but there was something off about her. Something cold, calculating." Clarissa's heart leaped. Did she say anything? Did she give any indication of where she might be going? Captain Ashton shook his head.
No.
She was secretive. She didn't talk much. But I remember overhearing her talking to Raymond one day. They were arguing. About money. About some kind of deal. And Du Bois, did he know?
I am sure he did.
That's how she got permission to be there. I overheard Raymond say that name. The name Du Bois got her access and kept Raymond quiet. Clarissa's mind raced. Money. A deal. It confirmed what Raymond had written in his letter. Isabel had been blackmailing him, using her brother's connections to control him. Do you remember anything else? Clarissa asked, her voice urgent. Anything at all? Captain Ashton hesitated. There was one thing. I remember seeing her with another man. A few days before Raymond died. Clarissa's heart pounded. Another man? Who? Did you see his face? Captain Ashton shook his head.
No.
It was dark. I only saw his silhouette. But he was tall. And he was wearing a distinctive hat. A fedora. With a feather in it. A fedora with a feather. It was a small detail, but it was something. A clue. Clarissa thanked Captain Ashton, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and hope. She had a new lead, a new direction to pursue. As she left his apartment, she felt a strange sensation, a feeling of being watched. She glanced back, but there was no one there. Only the shadows, lengthening in the afternoon sun. And the phantom of the man with the feathered fedora, a new player in the deadly game she was playing, his presence a chilling reminder that she was not alone in her search for the truth. Chapter 10. A Meeting in the Rain. The feathered fedora became Clarissa's obsession. She started noticing hats everywhere, scanning the crowds, searching for that one distinctive detail that might lead her to Isabel's mysterious companion, and hopefully, to Isabel herself. She spent her lunch breaks walking the streets of Washington, visiting the shops, the cafes, the theaters, her eyes constantly searching, her mind racing. Senator Fairbanks, meanwhile, continued his investigation, using his connections to track down any information about the man Captain Ashton had described. He discovered that a man matching that description had been seen in the vicinity of the War Department on several occasions, often in the company of known associates of Du Bois. The senator also uncovered some disturbing information about Operation Nightingale. It had been a complete disaster, a series of failed missions that had resulted in the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. The intelligence reports that had guided the operation had been fabricated, deliberately misleading. And the source of those reports?
Jean-Luc Dubois.
The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they revealed was even more sinister than Clarissa had imagined. Du Bois was not just a double agent, he was a master manipulator, a man who had orchestrated a campaign of death and deception, all for his own personal gain. And his sister, Isabel, was his accomplice, his partner in crime. One rainy afternoon, Clarissa was walking home from work, her umbrella shielding her from the downpour, when she saw him. He was standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. A fedora, with a feather. Clarissa's heart leaped into her throat. She stopped, her breath catching in her chest. She stared at the man, her eyes fixed on the feather, a small, dark plume that bobbed gently in the breeze. It was him. She was sure of it. She hesitated, her mind racing. Should she approach him?
Confront him?
Or should she follow him? See where he went? She decided to follow him. She crossed the street, keeping a safe distance, her eyes glued to his back. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. He turned a corner, then another, leading her deeper into the labyrinthine streets of Georgetown. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, blurring the edges of the buildings, creating a sense of unreality. Clarissa felt as if she were in a dream, a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. Finally, the man stopped in front of a small, unassuming house, a row house tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street. He took out a key and unlocked the door, disappearing inside. Clarissa stood across the street, watching the house, her heart pounding. Was Isabel inside? Was this their hideout? She waited, her umbrella dripping, her clothes soaked, her body shivering from the cold. She waited for what seemed like an eternity, but the man did not reappear. Finally, she decided to take a chance. She crossed the street and approached the house, her hand trembling. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. She hesitated. This was dangerous, reckless. But she had to know. She had to find Isabel. She had to bring her to justice. She took a deep breath and turned the knob. The door was unlocked. She pushed the door open, slowly, cautiously, and stepped inside. The house was dark, silent. The only sound the steady drumming of the rain on the roof. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. And something else. Something familiar. Clarissa's heart pounded in her chest. She took a step forward, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She saw a hallway leading to a series of rooms. She could hear a faint sound. A murmur. A voice. She followed the sound, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She reached a doorway and peered inside. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. And there, sitting in a chair, facing away from her, was a woman. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. It was her, Isabel. She was sure of it. But she was not alone. Standing beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, was Senator Fairbanks. Clarissa stared, frozen in place, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The rain outside seemed to intensify, mirroring the storm of confusion and betrayal raging within her. The meeting in the rain had revealed a truth far more shocking than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 11. The Hospital of Lost Souls. Clarissa's world tilted on its axis. Senator Fairbanks and Isabelle Dubois? The two people she had trusted, the two people who were supposed to be helping her together? It was impossible. Unthinkable.
Senator?
She whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible above the sound of the rain. Senator Fairbanks turned, his face a mask of shock and guilt. Isabelle remained seated, her back to Clarissa, her body rigid. Mrs. Moore, Senator Fairbanks said, his voice strained, "This is not what it looks like." Not what it looks like. Clarissa repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. You're with her? With the woman who destroyed my husband's life? The woman who is responsible for the deaths of countless soldiers? Senator Fairbanks took a step towards her, his hands outstretched, as if to calm her. Please, Mrs. Moore, let me explain.
Explain?
Clarissa's voice cracked. Explain how you betrayed me? How you betrayed Raymond? How you betrayed your country? Isabelle finally turned, her face a mixture of defiance and fear. She was even more beautiful up close, her dark eyes flashing, her lips set in a thin line. You, Clarissa said, her voice trembling. You did this. You and your brother. You manipulated Raymond. You used him. You killed him. Isabelle's eyes narrowed. He was weak, she said, her voice cold, devoid of emotion. He was a fool. He deserved what he got. Clarissa felt a surge of rage, a burning anger that consumed her grief. She wanted to lash out, to hurt her, to make her pay for what she had done. But she knew she had to control herself. She had to be smart. She had to find out the truth. Why, Senator? She asked, turning back to Fairbanks, her voice filled with a mixture of pain and bewilderment. Why did you do this? What did she offer you? Senator Fairbanks hesitated, his gaze shifting from Clarissa to Isabelle, then back again. He looked defeated, his usual air of confidence and authority gone. It's complicated, Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice low. There are things you don't understand. Then explain them to me, Clarissa demanded. Tell me the truth. Senator Fairbanks sighed, running a hand through his white hair. It started years ago, he began, his voice heavy with regret. Before the war, I was ambitious, greedy. I wanted power, influence, wealth. I made deals, bad deals, with the wrong people. He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. Dubois, he was one of those people. He offered me information, valuable information, information that could help me advance my career. I took it. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care where it came from. Clarissa's heart sank. She had suspected corruption, but this was worse than she had imagined. And then the war came, Senator Fairbanks continued. Dubois's information became more important, more valuable. He had access to secrets. Secrets that could influence the outcome of the war. I became dependent on him. I couldn't break free. And Isabelle? Clarissa asked, her voice trembling. Where does she fit in? Senator Fairbanks hesitated. Isabelle, she was Dubois's control. His leverage over me. She knew my secrets. She could expose me, ruin me. He had met Isabelle through her brother and had promised her money. Power. It was a weakness she was all too ready to exploit. Clarissa felt a wave of nausea. She had been so blind, so trusting. She had put her faith in a man who was corrupt, a man who had betrayed his country for his own personal gain. So you knew all along? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You knew about Raymond? About Dubois's treachery? About Operation Nightingale? Senator Fairbanks nodded, his eyes filled with shame. I knew parts of it. But I didn't want to believe it. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't true, that I could control the situation. But you couldn't, Clarissa said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. You were a puppet, just like Raymond. Senator Fairbanks looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Moore," he said, his voice choked with emotion.
I'm so sorry. For everything.
Clarissa stared at him, her heart aching. She didn't know what to do, what to say. She was trapped, surrounded by enemies, betrayed by the one person she had trusted. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A siren. Distant at first, but growing closer. Senator Fairbanks and Isabel exchanged a look of panic. "They're coming," Isabel said, her voice urgent. "We have to go." Senator Fairbanks nodded. "We have to get out of here." They turned to leave, but Clarissa stepped in front of them, blocking their path. "No," she said, her voice firm. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to face justice. For what you've done." Isabel laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You think you can stop us?" She sneered. "You're just a grieving widow. You're nothing." Clarissa stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Isabel. "I may be a grieving widow," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm not nothing. I'm Raymond's wife, and I will not let you get away with this." The sirens grew louder, closer. The sound of approaching cars filled the air. Senator Fairbanks and Isabel looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. They were trapped. Clarissa felt a surge of triumph. She had done it. She had exposed them. She had brought them to justice. But the triumph was short-lived. As the police burst through the door, their guns drawn, Clarissa felt a sharp pain in her side. She looked down and saw a knife. Sticking out of her dress, the handle held by Isabel. Clarissa gasped, her knees buckling beneath her. She fell to the floor, her vision blurring, the sound of the sirens fading into a distant hum. The last thing she saw, before darkness consumed her, was Isabel's face, a mask of hatred and satisfaction. She was taken to a nearby hospital, a place that reeked of antiseptic and despair, a hospital of lost souls, much like herself. Chapter 12. Betrayal in the Capitol. Clarissa awoke to a world of white. White walls, white sheets, white bandages. The antiseptic smell, sharp and sterile, filled her nostrils. She tried to move, but a searing pain in her side stopped her. She remembered Isabel, the knife, the betrayal. A nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, noticed her stirring. "You're awake," she said, her voice gentle. "You're lucky to be alive." That was a nasty wound. Clarissa tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice a hoarse whisper. Water. The nurse helped her to sit up and gave her a glass of water. Clarissa drank it greedily, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "What happened?" she asked, her voice still weak. Senator Fairbanks, Isabel, the nurse's expression changed, her eyes clouding with pity. "They're in custody," she said. "The police arrested them." Senator Fairbanks, he confessed. "To everything." Clarissa felt a wave of relief, followed by a deep, profound sadness. Fairbanks's confession meant justice for Raymond, but it also meant the confirmation of her deepest fears. The man she had trusted, the man who had promised to help her, had been her enemy all along. "And Isabel?" Clarissa asked, her voice trembling. The nurse hesitated. She's also in custody, but she's not talking. She's claiming diplomatic immunity." Clarissa's brow furrowed. "Diplomatic immunity? What do you mean?" "Apparently," the nurse explained, "Isabelle Dubois is, or was married to a minor official at the French embassy. She's claiming that she's protected by diplomatic immunity, that she can't be prosecuted for her crimes." Clarissa's heart sank. It was another twist, another layer of deception. Isabel, it seemed, had always had an escape plan, a way to avoid justice. The nurse left, promising to fetch the doctor. Clarissa lay back on the pillows, her mind racing. She had to do something. She couldn't let Isabel get away with this. She had to find a way to expose her, to make sure she faced justice for her crimes. Over the next few days, Clarissa slowly recovered. The doctor, a gruff but competent man, told her that she was lucky. The knife had missed her vital organs, but she had lost a lot of blood. She would need time to heal, both physically and emotionally. Visitors came and went. Captain Ashton, his face etched with worry, brought her flowers and words of encouragement. Mr. Henderson, her supervisor at the War Department, expressed his shock and disbelief at the news of Senator Fairbanks's betrayal. But there was one visitor Clarissa longed to see, one person who could truly understand her pain, her grief, her determination. Raymond's mother. Finally, she arrived. Eleanor Pierce was a small, frail woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile that belied the sadness she carried within. She had aged considerably since Clarissa had last seen her, the lines on her face deepening, her hair turning completely white. Clarissa and Eleanor embraced, tears streaming down their faces. They sat together, holding hands, sharing their grief, their memories of Raymond. "I always knew there was something wrong," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "I never believed the official story. I knew my son wouldn't have just died like that." Clarissa told her everything. About Raymond's letter, about Du Bois, about Isabel, about Senator Fairbanks's betrayal. Eleanor listened in silence, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. "We have to do something," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "We have to make sure they pay for what they've done. We have to avenge Raymond." Clarissa nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She and Eleanor would work together, would fight together, to bring justice to Raymond, to expose the truth, to ensure that Isabel and Du Bois and Fairbanks faced the consequences of their actions. The betrayal in the Capitol had shaken Clarissa to her core, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just a grieving widow, she was a warrior, a fighter, a woman determined to seek justice, no matter the cost. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and the constant murmur of suffering, became her temporary fortress, a place to plan her next move. The fight was far from over. Chapter 13. The Cipher and the Confession. Fueled by a shared sense of grief and a burning desire for justice, Clarissa and Eleanor began to meticulously piece together the fragments of Raymond's shattered life and the conspiracy that had consumed him. They spent hours poring over the maps, the telegram, and Raymond's letters, searching for any clue, any detail that might help them circumvent Isabel's claim of diplomatic immunity and expose the full extent of Du Bois's and Fairbanks's treachery. Clarissa, still weak but recovering steadily, used her time in the hospital to her advantage. She befriended a young, ambitious journalist named Emily Carter, who was recovering from a bout of pneumonia in a nearby room. Emily, eager for a scoop, listened with rapt attention to Clarissa's story, her eyes widening with each shocking revelation. "This is huge, Mrs. Moore," Emily said, her voice filled with excitement. "This could be the biggest story of the year. A senator, a double agent, a secret operation, it's all there." Clarissa, however, was cautious. "We need proof, Emily," she said. "We need something concrete, something that can't be dismissed as hearsay or conjecture. Isabel's claim of diplomatic immunity is a major obstacle. We need to find a way to discredit her, to prove that she was actively involved in the conspiracy." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "What about the maps?" she asked. Raymond's maps? Could they contain any coded messages? Any evidence of Du Bois's treachery? Clarissa had considered that possibility, but she hadn't been able to decipher the cryptic notations on the maps. She simply didn't have the expertise. "I need someone who understands military codes," she said. "Someone who can break the cipher." Emily had an idea. "I know just the person," she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "My uncle, Professor Alastair Finch. He's a cryptographer. He worked for the government during the war, breaking enemy codes. He's retired now, but he still dabbles. He'd love a challenge like this." Clarissa's heart leaped with hope. Professor Finch sounded like the perfect person to help them. Emily arranged a meeting, and a few days later, Professor Finch, a small, eccentric man with a magnifying glass perpetually perched on his nose, visited Clarissa in the hospital. He examined Raymond's maps with meticulous care, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Fascinating," he muttered, his fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. "Absolutely fascinating. This is a complex cipher, but not impenetrable." He spent hours working on the maps, his magnifying glass moving back and forth, his lips muttering strange incantations. Finally, he looked up, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "I've got it," he exclaimed. "I've broken the cipher. The maps, they contain the locations of arms shipments. Secret arms shipments, intended for the enemy." Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the proof they needed. "And Du Bois?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is his name mentioned?" Professor Finch nodded. "Yes. His name appears repeatedly. He's clearly the coordinator, the mastermind behind the operation." He pointed to a specific notation on one of the maps. "This symbol, it represents Isabel. She's the liaison, the one who delivers the information to the enemy." Clarissa felt a surge of vindication. They had done it. They had found the evidence, the irrefutable proof of Du Bois's and Isabel's treachery. Armed with Professor Finch's findings, Clarissa and Eleanor confronted Senator Fairbanks in prison. He was a broken man, his spirit crushed, his reputation ruined. He initially denied everything, clinging to his fabricated story, but when presented with the decoded maps and the evidence of Isabel's involvement, he finally cracked. He confessed to everything. He admitted that he had been working with Du Bois for years, providing him with classified information in exchange for money and political influence. He confessed that Isabel had been his mistress, his accomplice, his downfall. He confessed that Operation Nightingale had been a deliberate deception, a scheme designed to enrich Du Bois and weaken the American war effort. His confession, recorded by Emily Carter, was a bombshell. It exposed the full extent of the conspiracy, the depth of the betrayal, the sheer scale of the corruption that had permeated the highest levels of government. The news of Fairbanks's confession and the decoded maps sent shockwaves through Washington. The War Department launched a full-scale investigation, and several high-ranking officials were implicated in the scandal. Du Bois, stripped of his diplomatic cover, was arrested and charged with treason. And Isabel, her claim of diplomatic immunity, was shattered. The evidence, the decoded maps, Fairbanks's confession, it was all too overwhelming. She was arrested, charged as an accomplice, and held without bail. Clarissa, finally discharged from the hospital, felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. She had avenged Raymond. She had exposed the truth. She had brought the traitors to justice. But the victory was bittersweet. The scars of betrayal, the pain of loss, would remain with her forever. The cipher had been broken, but the code of her own heart was still a mystery, a puzzle she would have to solve on her own. Chapter 14. Scars of the Somme. With Du Bois and Isabel behind bars, awaiting trial, and Fairbanks a disgraced, broken man, Clarissa felt a sense of closure, but not peace. The wounds of the past, both physical and emotional, were still raw, still aching. She decided to return to her work at the War Department, hoping that the familiar routine would help her to heal, to move on. But the War Department was no longer the same. The scandal had shaken the institution to its core, and the atmosphere was thick with suspicion, distrust, and fear. Clarissa found herself ostracized by some of her colleagues, who viewed her as a troublemaker, a whistleblower who had brought shame upon the department. Others, however, treated her with a newfound respect, admiring her courage and determination. One day, while sorting through a pile of old files, a task that had once brought her a sense of order, but now felt like a constant reminder of her loss, she received a summons from the new Secretary of War, a stern, no-nonsense man named General John Pershing. Clarissa's heart pounded as she entered General Pershing's office. He was a formidable figure, his face etched with the scars of battle, his eyes piercing and unwavering. He gestured for her to sit, his gaze sweeping over her. "Mrs. Moore," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "I've been following your case. Your involvement in exposing the Du Bois-Fairbanks conspiracy. It was a remarkable feat, a service to your country." Clarissa felt a flicker of pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of sadness. "Thank you, General," she said, her voice low. "But it came at a great cost." General Pershing nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. You lost your husband in the war, Lieutenant Raymond Pierce." A brave man by all accounts. He was, Clarissa said, her voice trembling. He was the best man I ever knew. General Pershing was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. The war, it leaves its mark on all of us, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Scars both visible and invisible. He paused, then turned back to Clarissa. I've been reviewing your husband's file, he said. His service record. And the circumstances of his death. Clarissa's heart leaped. What was he going to say? There's something you should know, Mrs. Moore, General Pershing said, his voice hesitant. Something that was omitted from the official report. For your own protection. Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. What? What is it? General Pershing reached into a drawer and pulled out a file, a thick, manila folder marked confidential. He opened it and extracted a photograph, a black and white image of a group of soldiers standing in front of a bombed-out building. This photograph was taken just days before your husband's death, he said. It shows him with his unit. In the Somme. Clarissa stared at the photograph, her eyes searching for Raymond's face. She found him, standing in the back row, his expression grim, his eyes haunted. He looked older, wearier than she remembered. General Pershing pointed to another figure in the photograph, a man standing next to Raymond, his arms slung around his shoulder. This man, he said, is Captain Thomas Ashton. Clarissa's heart skipped a beat. Captain Ashton. The man who had brought her Raymond's final message. The man who had claimed to be with him when he died. Captain Ashton, he was not entirely truthful with you, Mrs. Moore, General Pershing said, his voice low. He omitted certain details. About how your husband died. Clarissa felt a cold dread creep up her spine. What are you saying? General Pershing hesitated. Raymond, he didn't die from a shell blast, as the official report stated. He was shot. By one of his own men. Clarissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth.
Shot?
By one of his own men?
But why?
General Pershing sighed. The circumstances were complex.
Confused.
It was the fog of war.
Un tragique accident.
Ashton had told her that they were pinned down by shelling. But Ashton was there, and he says it was Du Bois' men. That they had been surrounded and infiltrated. He took a breath. Raymond discovered the truth about Operation Nightingale and Du Bois' presence just a little too late. There was an order to eliminate all officers who knew. Clarissa felt a wave of nausea. Raymond murdered. By his own comrades, men he had trusted, men he had fought alongside. It was unbearable. Captain Ashton, he covered it up, General Pershing said. He falsified the report. To protect the reputation of the unit. To avoid a scandal. But why are you telling me this now? Clarissa asked, her voice trembling. General Pershing looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and respect. Because you deserve to know the truth, Mrs. Moore, he said. Because your husband, he deserves to have his story told. The real story.
He paused.
And because Captain Ashton, he's been carrying this burden for too long. He's a broken man, haunted by his guilt. Clarissa felt a surge of anger. Anger at Ashton, for lying to her, for concealing the truth. But also pity. Pity for a man who had been forced to make an impossible choice, a man who had been scarred by the horrors of war, just like her. The scars of the Somme, both literal and metaphorical, ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. The truth, once buried, was now unearthed, revealing a landscape of pain and betrayal that stretched far beyond the battlefields. Chapter 15. The Widow's Walk. The revelation of Raymond's true death, the brutal reality of his murder by friendly fire, and Captain Ashton's subsequent cover-up, sent Clarissa reeling. The carefully constructed narrative she had built around his death, the heroic sacrifice, the tragic accident, crumbled around her, leaving her with a raw, gaping wound of betrayal and loss. She confronted Captain Ashton, meeting him in the same dimly lit reception area of the War Department where they had first met. He was a shadow of his former self, his eyes hollow, his body trembling, his spirit utterly broken. Why, Captain? Clarissa asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and grief. Why did you lie to me? Why did you hide the truth? Captain Ashton looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, a deep, unyielding remorse. I did it to protect you, Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. To protect Raymond's memory. To avoid a scandal that would have destroyed his reputation, his honor. His honor? Clarissa's voice cracked. He was murdered, Captain. Murdered by his own men. And you covered it up? You let the truth be buried. Just like him? Captain Ashton flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. It was the fog of war, Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice barely audible. A chaotic situation. A tragic mistake. We were under orders to eliminate any threats. Raymond, he knew too much. He had discovered Du Bois's treachery. He was a liability. A liability? Clarissa repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. He was a hero, Captain. A brave, honorable man who was fighting for his country. And you let him be murdered and then you lied about it? Captain Ashton began to sob, his body shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do, Mrs. Moore, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I was scared. Confused. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake that has haunted me ever since. Clarissa stared at him, her heart aching. She saw his pain, his guilt, his remorse. She saw the scars of war, the deep, invisible wounds that had driven him to make such a desperate choice. She felt a surge of pity. Pity for Ashton, a man who had been broken by the horrors of war, just like her. But pity was not enough. It couldn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the loss. I can't forgive you, Captain, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. I can't forget what you've done. But I understand. I understand the pressures you were under, the choices you had to make. I understand the fog of war. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the silent room. But before she reached the door, she stopped and looked back at him. There's one thing you can do, Captain, she said, her voice low. One thing that might help you find some peace. Tell the truth. Tell the world what really happened. Tell them about Raymond. Tell them about the betrayal. Tell them about the scars of war. Captain Ashton looked at her, his eyes filled with a flicker of hope. Perhaps, by confessing his sins, by revealing the truth, he could finally find some redemption, some release from the burden he had carried for so long. Clarissa left the War Department, her heart heavy, her mind reeling. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her through the familiar streets of Georgetown, past the houses with their secrets, past the shadows that seemed to whisper of betrayal and loss. She found herself standing on the banks of the Potomac River, the water flowing silently, relentlessly, carrying the debris of the city, the remnants of broken lives, out to sea. She looked out at the horizon, at the vast expanse of sky, at the clouds that seemed to mirror the turmoil in her soul. She thought of Raymond, of his smile, his laughter, his love. She thought of the life they had planned, the dreams they had shared, the future that had been stolen from them. She thought of the shadow on the wall, the spectral reminder of his presence, the phantom that had haunted her for so long. She realized now that the shadow was not just a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination. It was a symbol of the truth, of the secrets that had been hidden, of the betrayal that had shattered her world. She climbed up onto the widow's walk of a nearby house, a small, railed platform that offered a panoramic view of the river, of the city, of the world. She stood there, gazing out at the horizon, feeling the wind in her hair, the tears on her cheeks. She was a widow, yes, but she was also a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had faced the darkness and emerged, scarred but not broken. She would carry the scars of war with her, always. But she would also carry the memory of Raymond, of his love, of his courage, of his sacrifice. She would live her life, fully, honestly, bravely. She would honor his memory by fighting for truth, for justice, for a world where such betrayals would never happen again. The widow's walk, a place of mourning and remembrance, became her vantage point, a place to look forward, to find strength, to embrace the future, however uncertain it might be. Chapter 16. Flight from Foggy Bottom. The public revelation of Raymond's true death and Captain Ashton's confession sent another shockwave through Washington, further eroding the already fragile trust in the government and the military. The press, fueled by Emily Carter's relentless reporting, clamored for answers, for accountability, for justice. The War Department, reeling from the scandal, launched a new investigation, focusing on the circumstances surrounding Raymond's murder and the extent of the cover-up. Several officers, implicated by Ashton's testimony, were placed under arrest, facing court-martial and potential charges of conspiracy and murder. Clarissa, meanwhile, found herself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero, a symbol of truth and resilience in the face of overwhelming betrayal. She received letters of support from all over the country, from ordinary citizens, from soldiers, from families who had lost loved ones in the war. But Clarissa shunned the attention, the accolades, the praise. She was not a hero, she insisted. She was simply a woman seeking justice for her husband, a woman trying to make sense of the senseless, to find some meaning in the midst of chaos and loss. She decided to leave Washington, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue, to find some peace, some solitude, some space to heal. She sold her apartment in Georgetown, packed her belongings, and bought a small cottage on the coast of Maine, a remote, windswept place far removed from the corridors of power and the shadows of betrayal. As she prepared to leave, she received a visit from an unexpected guest. Isabelle Dubois. Isabelle, awaiting trial, had been released on bail, her diplomatic connections still wielding some influence, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. She appeared at Clarissa's doorstep, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and fear. "Why are you here?" Clarissa asked, her voice cold, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disgust. I wanted to talk to you," Isabelle said, her voice trembling. "To explain." "Explain?" Clarissa's voice cracked. "Explain how you manipulated Raymond? How you used him, betrayed him, destroyed him. How you killed him." Isabelle flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was complicated." "Complicated?" Clarissa repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "There's nothing complicated about betrayal, Isabelle. There's nothing complicated about murder." Isabelle looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears. I loved him," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I loved Raymond. In my own way." Clarissa stared at her, her heart aching. She saw the pain in Isabelle's eyes, the desperation, the regret. She saw a glimmer of humanity, a flicker of the woman Raymond had once loved, before she had become consumed by darkness. "Love?" Clarissa said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Is that what you call it? You used him, Isabelle. You manipulated him. You blackmailed him. You drove him to his death. That's not love. That's obsession. That's destruction." Isabelle began to sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I never wanted him to die. I never intended for things to go so far." Clarissa felt a surge of pity. Pity for Isabelle, a woman who had destroyed her own life, as well as the lives of others, in pursuit of a twisted, obsessive love. "It's too late, Isabelle," Clarissa said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's too late for apologies, for regrets, for explanations. You have to face the consequences of your actions. You have to pay for what you've done." Isabelle nodded, her tears flowing freely. "I know," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know I deserve to be punished. But please, believe me. I never wanted him to die. I loved him." Clarissa turned away, unable to bear the sight of Isabelle's pain, of her desperate plea for understanding. She walked to the window, looking out at the empty street, at the shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. "Goodbye, Isabelle," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I hope you find some peace. Somewhere." Isabelle left, her footsteps echoing in the silent apartment. Clarissa remained at the window, watching as she disappeared into the darkness, a fleeting shadow, a reminder of the betrayal, the loss, the pain that had consumed her life. Clarissa's flight from Foggy Bottom was not an escape, but a transition, a journey from a place of darkness and deceit to a place of hope. A place where she could finally begin to heal, to rebuild, to find some meaning in the aftermath of the storm. She was leaving behind the ghosts of Washington, but she was carrying with her the memory of Raymond, the strength of her convictions, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Chapter 17. The Gardener's Secret. Clarissa's cottage in Maine was a small, weathered structure perched on a cliff overlooking the turbulent Atlantic Ocean. The salt-laced wind whipped around the house, carrying the cries of gulls and the constant roar of the waves crashing against the rocks below. It was a stark, desolate landscape, but Clarissa found a strange solace in its wild beauty, in its raw, untamed power. She spent her days walking along the beach, collecting seashells, watching the seabirds, breathing in the fresh, clean air. She began to garden, planting flowers and vegetables in a small patch of land behind the cottage, finding a therapeutic rhythm in the simple act of nurturing life, of coaxing beauty from the barren soil. She was alone, but not lonely. She had her memories, her books, her newfound connection to nature. She wrote letters to Eleanor Pierce, sharing her thoughts, her feelings, her slow, gradual healing. She received letters in return, filled with Eleanor's unwavering support, her shared grief, her quiet strength. One afternoon, while working in her garden, she noticed a man watching her. He was standing at the edge of her property, leaning against a weathered fence, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple work clothes, his hands calloused and tanned. Clarissa felt a flicker of unease, a lingering shadow of the paranoia that had haunted her in Washington. But there was something familiar about the man, something that drew her attention. She straightened up, wiping the dirt from her hands, and walked towards him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. The man removed his hat, revealing a weathered face, kind eyes, and a gentle smile. I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice soft, with a hint of a Maine accent. "My name is Samuel. Samuel Harding. I live down the road. I saw you working in your garden, and I thought I'd offer my assistance." Clarissa studied him, her eyes searching his face. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite place. "Assistance?" she asked. Samuel nodded. "I'm a bit of a gardener myself," he said. "I have a greenhouse. I grow flowers. And vegetables. I could share some of my seedlings with you, if you'd like." Clarissa hesitated. She was still wary, still cautious, but there was something about Samuel's gentle demeanor, his kind eyes, his genuine offer of help, that disarmed her. "That's very kind of you," she said, her voice softening. "Thank you." Samuel smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's no trouble at all," he said. I enjoy gardening. It's therapeutic, especially after a loss." Clarissa's heart skipped a beat. He knew. He knew about Raymond. How did you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep understanding, a shared sorrow. "Your story, it was in the newspapers," he said. "The Washington scandal. The betrayal. The loss. I recognized your name." He paused, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I lost my wife," he said, his voice barely audible. "A few years ago. To the influenza. The Spanish flu." Clarissa felt a surge of empathy, a connection to this man, this stranger who had experienced a similar loss, a similar pain. I'm sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. Samuel looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. "It's hard," he said, "to move on, to find peace, to start again." Clarissa nodded, her own tears welling up. "Yes," she said, "it is." They stood there for a moment, in silence, sharing their grief, their loss, their understanding. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of salt and earth, of flowers and decay. "Come," Samuel said, gesturing towards his house, a small, white cottage nestled among the trees. "Let me show you my greenhouse. I have some seedlings that might interest you. Clarissa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She followed him, her heart filled with a mixture of trepidation and hope. She was taking a chance, opening herself up to a stranger, to a new connection, to a new possibility. As they walked, Samuel revealed a little about the area, about how he came to live on that remote coast. He was not from the area. He had moved there to get away, to start anew. As they reached his greenhouse, the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. Clarissa stepped inside, her eyes widening in surprise. The greenhouse was filled with a riot of color, a vibrant tapestry of flowers and plants, a testament to Samuel's skill, his dedication, his love of nature. And then she saw it, a small, secluded corner of the greenhouse, filled with a single type of flower. A flower she recognized instantly. Lilacs. Raymond's favorite flower. Clarissa's heart pounded in her chest. She stared at the lilacs, her mind racing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. You grow lilacs? She asked, her voice trembling. Samuel nodded, his gaze fixed on the flowers. Yes, he said, his voice soft. They were her favorite. Clarissa felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of unreality. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the delicate petals of a lilac blossom. The scent, sweet and familiar, filled her nostrils, bringing with it a flood of memories, of emotions, of hope. The gardener's secret was about to be revealed, and Clarissa's world was about to change again. Chapter 18. Reunion at Rock Creek. Clarissa's hand trembled as she touched the lilac, the familiar scent triggering a cascade of memories, a torrent of emotions she thought she had buried. Her favorite? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on Samuel's face. Samuel nodded, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, a deep, lingering sorrow. My wife, he said, his voice choked with emotion. She loved lilacs. They reminded her of home, of happier times. He paused, his gaze shifting from the flowers to Clarissa, his eyes searching hers.
I saw you looking at them, he said.
The lilacs. You seem to know them, to recognize them. Clarissa's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The world seemed to be spinning around her, the greenhouse, the flowers, Samuel's face, all blurring into a kaleidoscope of color and light. Raymond, she finally managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. My husband. He loved lilacs. They were his favorite. Samuel's eyes widened, his expression changing from sadness to shock, to disbelief. Raymond? He repeated, his voice trembling. Raymond Pierce? Clarissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't hold back the flood of emotions any longer. The grief, the loss, the betrayal, the hope, all crashing over her like a tidal wave. Samuel stared at her, his mouth agape, his body shaking. He reached out, his hand grasping hers, his grip surprisingly strong. Clarissa, he said, his voice choked with emotion. It's me. It's Raymond. Clarissa gasped, her knees buckling beneath her. She would have fallen if Raymond hadn't caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. Raymond? She whispered, her voice filled with disbelief, with wonder, with a joy so intense it felt like pain. But you're dead.
I saw the telegram.
I buried your belongings. Raymond held her close, his tears mingling with hers. It was a lie, Clarissa, he said, his voice trembling. A necessary lie. To protect you. To protect us. He explained everything. The ambush, the order to eliminate him, Captain Ashton's desperate attempt to save his life by faking his death, the secret identity, the new life in Maine, the constant fear, the unwavering hope that one day, somehow, he would be able to return to her. Ashton, he helped me, Raymond said. He smuggled me out of France. He gave me money, a new name, a new life. He told me to disappear, to never contact you, for your own safety.
But why?
Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know you were alive? Clarissa asked, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and anger. Raymond looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I couldn't, Clarissa," he said. "It was too dangerous. Du Bois, Isabel, they were still out there. They would have killed you. Both of us. I had to protect you, even if it meant breaking your heart." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face. "I watched you, Clarissa," he said. "From afar. I followed your progress. I saw your strength, your courage, your determination to expose the truth. I was so proud of you.
So amazed by you.
But how did you end up here? In Maine?" Clarissa asked, her mind still reeling. "Ashton told me to go somewhere remote. Somewhere no one would think to look. He said he had a cousin up in Maine, and gave me the address." He smiled a little. It was a chance, a faint hope. Clarissa stared at him, her eyes filled with wonder. It was him. It was really him. Her Raymond.
Alive.
After all this time, they embraced, holding each other tight, their tears flowing freely. The years of grief, of loss, of separation, melted away in that moment, replaced by a joy so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like a miracle. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing their stories, their pain, their healing. Raymond explained how he had built his new life, how he had found solace in gardening, in the simple act of nurturing life, of creating beauty in the midst of desolation. Clarissa told him about her struggles, her battles, her determination to expose the truth, to avenge his supposed death. She told him about Eleanor, about Emily Carter, about Professor Finch, about the trials of Du Bois, Isabel, and Fairbanks. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm, golden glow over the ocean, they walked hand in hand along the beach, their hearts filled with a love that had endured the test of time, of betrayal, of death itself. They decided to return to Washington, to confront the past, to reclaim their lives, to start anew. They would visit Eleanor, tell her the truth, share their joy with the woman who had mourned her son for so long. They would visit Rock Creek Park, the place where they had first met, where they had fallen in love, where they had dreamed of a future together. A future that had been stolen from them, but now, miraculously, had been returned. The reunion at Rock Creek, once a place of bittersweet memories, would now become a symbol of their enduring love, their resilience, their triumph over adversity. Chapter 19. The Price of Peace. Returning to Washington was a bittersweet experience for Clarissa and Raymond. The city, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, now held a complex mix of memories, love, betrayal, loss, and ultimately, a hard-won victory. The whispers followed them, the stares, the murmurs of recognition. They were no longer just figures in a newspaper scandal, they were living embodiments of a story that had captivated the nation. Their first stop was Eleanor Pierce's home. The reunion was emotionally charged, filled with tears, embraces, and a profound sense of disbelief giving way to overwhelming joy. Eleanor, initially shocked and overwhelmed, soon embraced Raymond with a fierce love, her heart overflowing with a relief that transcended words. "My son," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, her hands tracing the lines on his face, as if to reassure herself that he was real, that he was truly there. "You're alive. You're really alive." Raymond held her close, his own tears flowing freely. "I'm here, Mother," he said. "I'm home." The three of them spent hours talking, sharing their experiences, piecing together the fragmented narrative of the past few years. Eleanor listened with rapt attention as Raymond recounted his escape from France, his new life in Maine, his constant fear, and his unwavering hope of returning to Clarissa. Clarissa, in turn, shared her journey, her struggles, her battles against Du Bois, Isabel, and Fairbanks. She spoke of her grief, her anger, her determination to seek justice, and her eventual discovery of Raymond's survival. Eleanor, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow, expressed her gratitude to Clarissa for her courage, her resilience, her unwavering loyalty to Raymond's memory. "You saved him, Clarissa," she said, her voice firm. "You brought him back to us. You gave me back my son." Clarissa shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "He saved himself, Eleanor," she said. "He was the one who was brave, who endured, who never gave up hope. The trials of Du Bois, Isabel, and Fairbanks were still ongoing, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the confessions irrefutable, the public outcry deafening. Justice, it seemed, would finally be served. Raymond, however, had a difficult decision to make. He could reclaim his old identity, return to his former life, seek reinstatement in the military. But the war, the betrayal, the years in hiding had changed him. He was no longer the same man who had left for France, filled with youthful idealism and patriotic fervor. He had seen the darkness, the corruption, the cruelty of the world. He had experienced the pain of loss, the sting of betrayal, the weight of secrets. He had found peace, solace, and a new sense of purpose in his simple life in Maine, in his connection to nature, in his quiet existence. He decided to testify at the trials, to tell his story, to expose the truth, to ensure that those responsible for his suffering, for the suffering of countless others, were held accountable. But after that, he would return to Maine, to Clarissa, to their cottage by the sea, to the life they had begun to build together. The trials were a media sensation, drawing national attention, exposing the deep-seated corruption within the government and the military. Raymond's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity and unwavering conviction, was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. He recounted his experiences in the war, his discovery of Du Bois's treachery, his near-death experience, his escape, his new life, his unwavering love for Clarissa. He spoke of the betrayal, the loss, the pain, but also of the hope, the resilience, the enduring power of the human spirit. His words resonated with the public, with the jury, with everyone who had been touched by the war, by the scandal, by the story of a love that had survived against all odds. Du Bois and Fairbanks were found guilty of treason, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder. They were sentenced to life in prison, their reputations forever tarnished, their lives shattered. Isabel, despite her attempts to manipulate the system, was also found guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. Her diplomatic connections, weakened by the scandal, could not save her. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, her beauty, her charm, her power, all reduced to ashes. The price of peace, Clarissa realized, was high. It demanded sacrifice, courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to truth and justice. But it was a price worth paying. For Raymond, for herself, for Eleanor, for all those who had suffered, for all those who had lost their lives in the pursuit of a better world. As the trials concluded and justice was finally served, they left the courtroom together. A new chapter began, filled not with the echoes of war, but with the quiet promise of a future built on love, trust, and the enduring strength of their reunited hearts. Chapter 20. A New Dawn, a New Shadow. The return to Maine was a homecoming in every sense of the word. The small cottage, once a refuge for Clarissa's solitude, now welcomed them both, its walls echoing with shared laughter, whispered conversations, and the quiet comfort of their reunited love. The garden, once a symbol of Clarissa's solitary healing, now bloomed with a renewed vibrancy, a testament to their shared future. Raymond, no longer Samuel Harding, but once again Lieutenant Raymond Pierce, though he preferred to be called simply Raymond, embraced his new life with a quiet joy, a profound gratitude for the second chance he had been given. He continued to garden, to find solace in the rhythm of the seasons, in the simple act of nurturing life. He and Clarissa spent their days walking along the beach, collecting seashells, watching the seabirds, sharing their thoughts, their dreams, their hopes for the future. They rebuilt their lives, brick by brick, memory by memory, weaving together the threads of their past, present, and future. They spoke of the war, of the betrayal, of the pain, but also of the love, the resilience, the strength that had carried them through. They healed together, their scars a reminder of the battles they had fought, the victories they had won. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple, Clarissa noticed something. A shadow. It was faint at first, a subtle darkening of the wall of the cottage, a slight distortion of the light. But as the sun dipped lower, the shadow grew stronger, more defined, taking on a familiar shape. Clarissa's heart skipped a beat. She remembered the shadow on the wall of the War Department building, the spectral reminder of Raymond's supposed death, the phantom that had haunted her for so long. "Raymond," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "look." The shadow. Raymond turned, his gaze following hers. He saw the shadow, its elongated form, its vaguely human shape, its familiarity. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "It's still there," he said, his voice soft. Clarissa felt a flicker of fear, a lingering echo of the past. "But what does it mean?"
she asked.
"Is it a warning? A reminder?" Raymond reached out, his hand taking hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "It's a reminder, Clarissa," he said. "But not of the past, of the future." He explained that he had noticed the shadow on the cottage wall ever since he moved in his new identity. He had seen that the shadow only presented itself when a specific window was illuminated in the neighboring house, a house he had always known to be empty. He was afraid to check, in case his cover was blown. A reminder of what? Clarissa asked. Raymond looked at her, his eyes filled with love, with hope, with a quiet strength that transcended the scars of the past. "A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always light," he said. "A reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there is always trust. A reminder that even in the midst of loss, there is always love." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face. "A reminder that we are stronger together," he said. "That we can overcome anything, as long as we have each other." Clarissa nodded, her tears welling up, but this time, they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of a love that had endured the test of time, of death, of deception. The shadow on the wall remained, a constant presence, but it no longer frightened her. It was no longer a phantom of the past, but a symbol of their future, a reminder of their resilience, their strength, their enduring love. As the sun finally set, casting a warm, golden glow over the cottage, over the garden, over the two figures silhouetted against the horizon, the shadow faded, dissolving into the gathering darkness. But the light remained, a beacon of hope, a promise of a new dawn, a new beginning, a new life, built on the foundations of love, trust, and the unwavering belief in a future free from the shadows of the past. The new shadow was not a threat, but a testament to the enduring power of love, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. Epilogue. Years passed, flowing like the tides that washed the shores near their main cottage. Clarissa and Raymond lived a quiet life, filled with simple joys, shared moments, and the enduring comfort of their love. The scars of the past remained, a constant reminder of the battles they had fought, the losses they had endured, but they no longer defined them. They were merely threads in the rich tapestry of their lives, interwoven with strands of resilience, strength, and an unwavering hope. The garden bloomed year after year, a vibrant testament to their shared passion, their nurturing spirit, their ability to coax beauty from even the most barren soil. The lilacs, Raymond's favorite, flourished, their sweet scent filling the air, a constant reminder of their reunion, of the love that had survived against all odds. Eleanor Pierce became a frequent visitor, her presence a source of joy, of connection to a past that, while painful, had ultimately brought them all together. She doted on Clarissa and Raymond, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the miracle that had returned her son to her. Emily Carter, the ambitious young journalist who had helped expose the truth, became a lifelong friend, her visits filled with lively conversations, shared laughter, and a mutual respect for the power of truth and the importance of justice. Captain Ashton, haunted by his past, eventually found a measure of peace by dedicating his life to helping other veterans, sharing his story, and advocating for better care and support for those scarred by war. He never fully forgave himself, but he found a purpose in his remorse, a way to atone for his mistakes. The trials of Du Bois, Isabel, and Fairbanks faded into history, becoming a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of democracy, the corrupting influence of power, and the enduring need for vigilance and integrity. Clarissa and Raymond never forgot the past, but they did not dwell on it. They lived in the present, cherishing each moment, embracing the simple joys of their life together. They walked along the beach, hand in hand, watching the sunsets, sharing their thoughts, their dreams, their hopes for the future. The shadow on the wall of the cottage remained, a subtle, almost imperceptible presence, a reminder of the darkness they had overcome, of the light that had guided them through. But it no longer held any power over them. It was simply a part of their story, a symbol of their resilience, their strength, their enduring love. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Clarissa leaned her head on Raymond's shoulder, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace, of contentment, of gratitude. "We made it, Raymond," she whispered, her voice soft, filled with emotion. "We survived." Raymond smiled, his arm tightening around her, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of the night sky. "Yes, my love," he said.
We did.
Together. And as the stars twinkled above them, like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth, they knew that their love, their bond, their shared journey had created a light that would endure, a light that would shine brightly, forever, illuminating their path, guiding their way, a testament to the enduring power of hope, of resilience, and of a love that had conquered even death itself. The world had changed, they had changed, but their love remained, a constant, unwavering force, a beacon in the darkness, a promise of a future filled with peace, with joy, and with the enduring beauty of a life lived together, fully, honestly, and with a love that knew no bounds. The end.